this week we're going to build on the methodology lecture we had last week and think about synthesis. So one of the things we're going to ask you to do a lot at the centre is to go and gather lots of data, lots of information, lots of ideas, lots of things. And then you need to start making sense of it. So you need to have a way of sort of processing that information. So what we're going to talk today about is synthesis. And Marla pointed this out to me. I didn't do Latin. She did. What does the word mean?
It means literally putting knowledge together.
Right.
Thesis knowledge, thinkers putting it together.
So it's how we draw knowledge together into a useful way. And we talked last time a little bit about this idea that research is about communicating something to other people. So communicating knowledge, making it useful for other people as much as it is about gathering and analysing that information. So one of the things we're going to do today is we are going to, oh, sorry, let me just get me clicker. There we go. Is we're going to think about pattern, right? So we're going to think about how we find meaning in data, particularly in research data in this case. So one of the things we ask you to do a lot is post-its, right? You might have heard us say, go and think about your idea, get it on the post-its and do a bit of clustering, right? We might say, get all the kind of literature that you've read, stick it up on a board, whether that's mural or physical, and start postering it and kind of finding some ideas and clustering it. Now, underneath that idea, and I think in design thinking it's specifically called post-it clustering, it's probably a method you're going to learn about. We kind of think that actually we want to discuss what underlies that. Now, it's a big subject, it's quite vast, but we're going to talk particularly about thematic analysis here as a form of making sense or finding pattern in the information that we're gathering as kind of innovators and at the centre. So I'm going to talk about 4 key things here. That says, oh, I'm going to move because that could be very wrong. I'm going to go there, thematic process. Right, so 4 stages of this, right? We've got data. So data are the kind of the discrete pieces of information or things or social phenomena that we are describing in our research. So this might be an interview, it might be photographs, it might be, I'm trying to think what else it might be. It could be data, could be statistics, could be numbers. That's probably the most obvious one. What we then do is we set out that data, right? So if we think about the post-it analogy, because that's the form we're probably going to use mostly, we'll literally put post-its out, pieces of data on. No, sorry, let me go back, sorry. The data is the things that were the information that we gathered, sorry. The coding is where we take that piece of information and we assign a code to it. So for me, I always think about hashtags as the most obvious, right? So when you hashtag an image or you hashtag a post, you write a short descriptive word that kind of sums it up or sums up an aspect of the thing that you are kind of looking at, the piece of data. So we've got our data, we've started making codes. So again, those codes could be going through a text and making codes about sentences. They could be codes about an image we're looking at. We'll have a look at some examples in class to do that in that process. But then we've added code to those. So we've got a set of tags. Now, what that looks like on a board is probably just post-its absolutely everywhere, right? So how do we start to make sense of that? Well, we start to cluster it. So we start to put them into small spaces, right, together. So we say, these things share some kind of common theme, okay? We give that theme a title, it's probably a couple of words. So I don't know, for example, for you guys, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, it might be people and place, okay? Now, if it's people and place, that's a great theme and you might have some really good bits of data that talk to that and codes, but that doesn't really mean anything to anyone else, right? It might help start to make sense in your head, but the next stage is to write a memo. So what we do is, what do we mean by location, for example? Or what do we mean by, I don't know, in an inaccessible space? And you'd literally just write a short note that describes it. Now, we're going to go through this process. Again, referring back to our last lecture, it's a much messier process than this. But this gives you some structure under the thing that you've already been asked to do, which is the kind of cluster, post-it clustering and kind of thematic analysis. Okay, so sorry, get me clicker. Okay, so let's think about code, okay? So if we're going to take a word, how do we kind of create, if we're going to take, sorry, a piece of data, how do we create a code from that? So let's just take this one. So me and Molly are going to do this one together. So here is an image. What codes come up when you see this, Mala?
Kind of fashion,
Mm-hmm.
Afro futures, or
Yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm feeling sort of dystopia a little bit. I'm seeing
yeah,
diversity. I'm seeing fictional futures because it looks really sci-fi to me. There's something about heritage and mixing kind of imagery. What other words might we have?
maybe the end of the world, or
Yeah, you might have fabric, so it might also be about textural things. So it could be about tone. It could be
it
about
could be about masculinity.
masculinity. Yeah, visions of masculinity. But you see, we've got each of those would be a single posted like masculinity, texture, ideas, Afro futures.
Blackness.
Blackness, right? You know, visions of what it is to be black or to be African or to be, you know, the baobab tree in the background or heritage or, you know, so each of those is a single word and we start to cluster those. So some of those might be around materiality, right? So the textures that we can see, the colors that we can see, sorry, aesthetics. So we cluster those around aesthetics. Now we then take aesthetics and we say, okay, in this image, the thing that we discussed or drew out from this was this notion of aesthetics. I don't know, aesthetics as a way of challenging the idea of blackness, right? For example, fashion is challenging the way of blackness. But we describe that in detail, and hopefully once we develop that, we would also contextualize that in other people's work, right? Right. Oh, hello, Donald Trump. Oh, you can't see the quote. I don't see, can you see that
No,
quote? Okay. So let's leave that one. I think a photo one's.
can you read it? I think that is important.
No, I can't see the text. Can you just give me 2 seconds? I will get it up if you give me literally 2 seconds. Okay, it is. Okay, there we go. The text says, it's from one of his tweets, right? It says, I wouldn't mind a little bow. In Japan, they bow. I love it. Only thing I love about Japan. Okay, so that's the tweet. So I wouldn't mind a little bow. In Japan, they bow. I love it. Only thing I love about Japan. So what does that tweet tell us, right?
So first of all, that it says that a tweet is also a data,
Yeah.
a business data.
Who lies repeatedly and is very untrustworthy is just as key a source as a photograph or a piece of academic text, right?
It says something about Japan. So
Yeah.
maybe visions of Asia in America.
There's something about him wanting people to bow for him. So there's something about wanting deference or narcissistic, or what else would we have there? You know, king complex is one that I would think about. So again, here, right, we start to have these single items from a very simple text. So again, there's 2 really important things I want you to learn from this one. Is one, you can use tweets as a source. I often get asked, do we have to use academic sources or can we just use any? They're all academic sources. You know, a kid's drawing can be an academic source. A photograph, an advert can be an academic source. How we treat it and how we analyze it is what turns it into an academic source, okay? So again, here we'd have those simple words. For me, this thing about bow, deference, you know, his understanding of what Japan is, which is probably quite wrong. And then for me, I put that underground king complex. And then we could write about Trump and his king complex, which would probably take a 10-year dissertation. But that's fine because he's not president anymore. Well, he is, but only for a little bit longer. Okay, let me just get my next one. Yeah, so I just wanted to return to the story that Marley told about her research in the last video that we did. Does she want sugar? So coming back to this idea that those 4 words contain a lot of meaning, a lot of kind of information about maybe epistemological view. So we don't want to forget the user. We feel that that's something we want to approach, but it also, what's the word? It contains a lot of wider meaning, right? And a lot of understanding that Malé developed through that research project about people being ignored as, you know, disabled people or people with Alzheimer's. But on its own, it doesn't work, right? Just on its own, just as a code. You need to discuss that, explain it, the story behind it so that that richness can come out. But as a code, it's really successful, right? To start with, because it allows you to expand and kind of draw meaning from the experiences that you've had. And actually that I assume was in a conversation, right? With someone. It's not like this was a, you know, detailed written survey. It's from a method, it was drawn out. I'm going to stop. So why do we do this? Well, it's about sense making and pattern making. So we dive into this information that we've got. We try to make patterns. It's how we function as humans. But what we're doing here is sharing a method of a form of analysis and pattern making that we use very heavily at the center. Each of you will use a different one in your core disciplines, but we think it's really important that you learn this. So themes, what is a theme? Right, so we've clustered, we've said we're going to have a big word, right? What does that look like for us? Malo's introduced me to this, which is the A-E-I-O-U. But if we think about this really simply, right, if we're going to be doing work with people in places and we're going to be building stuff, our key themes are likely to be around activities, the things that we do, the environments that we're in, the interactions between people, object, place, and wider structures, objects, things, materials, and users, people, right?
Yeah, I usually, for example, we went and observe a farmer market. And we have a day of observation. Some people can talk with someone, or some people find secondary data or the history of the market or the products. And then we come together and we make a big piece of paper, A in one corner, E in one corner, O and U, and interactions in the middle. And that help you to think about that. But let's think that we actually want to create a new store. Instead of activities, environments, and objects, we start thinking about the colors or the shapes. So everything color yellow, everything shape round, or we start thinking about the values or the histories. So it depends of your question. But this one to start is very useful to start thinking about themes. If you do one thematic, then you can do another one. And the interesting thing is the reiteration, because the things that always stay are the things that are going to be the most useful.
And what's interesting at the center is that the way we work is over 4 years, we provide you with lots of bits already, right? We provide you the methodologies, the methods, the places, the people. Often we tell you what the topics we want to know about are, which is people, place, location, right? As that goes on in your second, third, fourth year, this becomes much more up to you, to the point when you leave, when it is on, when actually in your fourth year, it's totally up to you how you approach this, your methodologies, how you want to do this. But we provide some of this for you. So think about that when we're setting you stuff, you know, we're setting you a project where you want to think about the people and the place, well, then maybe those are two of the themes you're going to explore when you start to do your analysis. So memos, right, is really key. One of the things that I often see is, and I'm just going to go back to an image here, sorry, just give me a minute. What I often see is, we see a write-up, right, we did all this research, we did interviews, blah, 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 and then this is our analysis, and there's a picture of some post-its, right? I'd say a majority of people do this. It's fine to have a picture of the post-its, but all that's showing me is that you went through an analysis process, okay? What I want is a discussion of the themes and the results of that analysis, right? So Marley talked about this last year. In the last week. The research is the results of the process that you've gone through. We need it to be articulated. So in this case, in a memo, it might be, let's go back to Donald Trump. It might be, we talked about King Complex. We'll describe that. What do we mean by that theme? What does it draw on? You can draw on the single small pieces of information that make up that theme. That's the point. All of this is to help. Yeah.
Yeah, I can think about examples. I see a lot of my work, actually. And I have a bunch of posters that in the middle I put sustainability, or in the middle I put privacy. It happened that I worked with engineers, computer scientists, and what they understand by privacy is very, very different of what a teenager understands by privacy, or if a mother understands by privacy, or a porn actress understands by privacy. So what we want is that these memos actually explain what is your take, what is your label meaning, rather than one word.
And again, this allows us to go, once you get to these final kind of themes or memos and you write them up, what's beautiful is if you've got a chart, a kind of a thematic chart, you can go back to the very quote, to a quote that came under that theme. You might have 100 different quotes that came under one theme. There's one quote that really helps. So, does she want sugar, right?
Yeah.
That could be the key quote that sets everything off. But it shows the process you went through, so it was a logical process of analysis, even though it's subjective, which it always is, that's the point, we'll come on to that. It shows that process, but more importantly, it shows someone else that process, so they can make a decision about your research. So this brings us on to emergence. So just give me 1 minute, I'm just going to flick onto my notes. This is from a paper, sorry, the actual quote hasn't come up, but it says, the language of themes emerging can be misinterpreted to mean that themes reside in the data. And if we just look hard enough, they'll emerge, right? If themes reside anywhere, they reside in our heads, from our thinking about data and creating links as we understand them. What this quote is saying is that there are not themes that are innate in the data that you have. There are not set truths, if we want to think about a kind of a different epistemological view. If I do this and someone else completely different, someone different does this, they're not going to find the exact themes and the way I did. But me being subjective, me thinking through things is not a problem if we can share with other people how we did it. If I just went, oh, I did some analysis and I think this is true, great, I don't know why I should believe you. But if I can show you my process and how I got there, and I can highlight that with particular quotes or elements that went into that process, it's convincing. It's a golden thread, to come back to Marlo's idea. So just one more, which is saturation, which I think is really important. Now, we can talk about this on quite a few different levels, but we can talk about this in terms of data, because this is a cyclical process. Again, we're articulating these research methods like they're kind of this magical formula. It's messy, it's difficult, but it allows you to structure and think about how you're doing this kind of process. So with saturation, with your research, how do you know when you've got enough data to kind of say that a theme is valid, right?
So I have this question a lot from the students. How many references we have to reference to have a good project? And I say, and that's an impossible question.
It really is.
It's part of your golden thread. It has to align with the methods, with the question, with your values, and so on. So the saturation, I think, it has to do also with purpose limitation.
Yep.
And your deadlines as well.
Yes,
it is exactly. In design that we only finish design because we have a deadline, and that we could be designing something forever.
Yeah, definitely. But it does also talk to this idea that if you haven't got enough, you have to go back, right? So sometimes we're like, is 5 interviews and 3 questionnaires and 2 things enough? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, it might be that your one interview is enough because it's a detailed subject. It might be that 10,000 interviews isn't enough if you're looking at something on a much more global scale. It's very much dependent. But the answer to this is you need to consider your own work and what is the saturation point, and try and be as honest as possible with yourself, I think. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. So next time we're going to be doing clustering, and next time we're going to be using post-its. We don't expect you to be able to go, oh, this is my thematic thing, which relates blah, blah, blah. But have this in mind in terms of structure. We start with data, we start to code it, we bring that into themes, we discuss those themes, we repeat, okay? It's a craft, right? I've been doing this maybe 10 years. I'm still learning. It's still a tool. It's not the thing, but it's a useful tool. Okay, it's a useful tool here because we're going to use it a lot in the centre particularly. All right, thanks very much. And thanks, Molly, for joining me again. And we'll see you soon.